0600 local time, Strait of Hormuz. The strait at 0600 is commerce. Laden tankers tracking eastbound at 12 knots, bulk carriers, gas carriers. Container vessels moving in both directions across a compressed geometry, 2 inbound lanes, 2 outbound, each approximately 2 nautical miles wide, inside a waterway that measures roughly 21 nautical miles at its narrowest point. Routine traffic, routine headings, routine log entries. The morning watch is uneventful. Then the advisory arrives. On February 9, 2026, the United States Department of Transportation published a formal notice to all American-flagged commercial vessels transiting or approaching the Strait of Hormuz. The instruction: maintain maximum possible distance from Iranian territorial waters. Eastbound transits should track as close to Oman's territorial sea boundary as navigational safety permits. If Iranian forces initiate a boarding attempt, assert navigational rights, decline permission, do not physically resist. That document, a civilian safety advisory, not a military warning order, is not the beginning of this story. It is the visible surface of a threat picture that has been accumulating for weeks. You're watching Navy Operations. Subscribe for more naval breakdowns. The advisory lands in a specific context. Behind it sits the number that anchors everything that follows. 20%. 1 in 5 barrels of petroleum traded anywhere in the world transits this single passage every day, around the clock, regardless of what is happening on the diplomatic or military boards running above it. That figure, documented and consistent across International Energy Agency reporting, is the operational constant against which every decision in this analysis is measured. Shipping operators, insurance underwriters, freight rate analysts, credit officers, naval commanders, all of them are watching the same 21 nautical miles. The DOT advisory is precise in what it confirms. Iranian forces have used small boats and helicopters in boarding operations against commercial vessels transiting the strait, according to the advisory text. Those forces have actively attempted to coerce vessels into Iranian territorial waters. The tactics are documented and on record in the published notice. Fast attack patrol craft approaching from multiple bearings, helicopters maintaining overhead command positions, armed boarding teams prepared for rapid insertion. These are not historical references. These are confirmed, ongoing patterns documented by a United States government agency in February 2026. The advisory also specifies the conduct framework for vessels that encounter an IRGCN boarding attempt. First, communicate clearly that the vessel is conducting lawful international transit under international maritime law. Decline boarding permission explicitly. Document the communication on the bridge log. Second, do not physically resist if boarding occurs. The reasoning is straightforward. A commercial crew with no armament and no tactical support within visual range cannot prevent an armed boarding party from coming over the rail. Resistance produces casualties. Compliance preserves the crew while international legal channels address the seizure. The advisory is calibrated to that reality. The document is also precise about what it cannot provide. Response time. The window between an IRGCN boarding and a vessel crossing into Iranian territorial waters is measured in minutes. U.S. naval response time, even with regional assets deployed, does not compress inside that window under most conditions. The advisory's routing guidance, hold close to Oman, maximize southern sea room, is a time distance calculation. Every additional nautical mile of separation from the Iranian coast is additional minutes in the response window. Distance is time. The routing is the margin. At 5 o'clock, the professional risk sector weighs in. The most direct assessment of the current threat environment comes not from a military command, but from BIMCO, the Baltic and International Maritime Council, one of the most authoritative organizations in global maritime safety. Jakob Larsen, BIMCO's chief safety and security officer, confirmed on record, Iran poses a credible threat to shipping if hostilities break out. That word, credible, carries a specific weight in professional risk assessment. It is not speculative. It is not worst-case framing. It is a determination by a maritime safety authority that the threat meets the threshold of operational reality, not theoretical contingency. Larsen extended the targeting profile beyond American-flagged vessels specifically. Any shipping operation with confirmed or assessed business or personal links to the United States or Israel is assessed as being at elevated risk of IRGCN targeting. He added the misidentification variable. In a constrained waterway with high commercial traffic density, operational tempo, and tactical stress, The probability that an IRGCN patrol element misidentifies a neutral commercial vessel as a target is not negligible. All ships will be at risk if hostilities break out. Larson assessed. That applies under every flag. The DOT advisory is precise in what it confirms. Iranian forces have used small boats and helicopters in boarding operations against commercial vessels transiting the strait, according to the advisory text. Those forces have actively attempted to coerce vessels into Iranian territorial waters. The tactics are documented and on record in the published notice. Fast attack patrol craft approaching from multiple bearings, helicopters maintaining overhead command positions, armed boarding teams prepared for rapid insertion. These are not historical references. These are confirmed, ongoing patterns documented by a United States government agency in February 2026. The advisory also specifies the conduct framework for vessels that encounter an IRGCN boarding attempt. First, communicate clearly that the vessel is conducting lawful international transit under international maritime law. Decline boarding permission explicitly. Document the communication on the bridge log. Second, do not physically resist if boarding occurs. The reasoning is straightforward. A commercial crew with no armament and no tactical support within visual range cannot prevent an armed boarding party from coming over the rail. Resistance produces casualties. Compliance preserves the crew while international legal channels address the seizure. The advisory is calibrated to that reality. The document is also precise about what it cannot provide. Response time. The window between an IRGCN boarding and a vessel crossing into Iranian territorial waters is measured in minutes. U.S. naval response time, even with regional assets deployed, does not compress inside that window under most conditions. The advisory's routing guidance, hold close to Oman, maximize southern sea room, is a time distance calculation. Every additional nautical mile of separation from the Iranian coast is additional minutes in the response window. Distance is time. The routing is the margin. At 5 o'clock, the professional risk sector weighs in. The most direct assessment of the current threat environment comes not from a military command, but from BIMCO, the Baltic and International Maritime Council, one of the most authoritative organizations in global maritime safety. Jakob Larson, BIMCO's chief safety and security officer, confirmed on record, Iran poses a credible threat to shipping if hostilities break out. That word, credible, carries a specific weight in professional risk assessment. It is not speculative. It is not worst-case framing. It is a determination by a maritime safety authority that the threat meets the threshold of operational reality, not theoretical contingency. Larson extended the targeting profile beyond American-flagged vessels specifically. Any shipping operation with confirmed or assessed business or personal links to the United States or Israel is assessed as being at elevated risk of IRGCN targeting. He added the misidentification variable. In a constrained waterway with high commercial traffic density, operational tempo, and tactical stress, the probability that an IRGCN patrol element misidentifies a neutral commercial vessel as a target is not negligible. All ships will be at risk if hostilities break out. Larson assessed. That applies under every flag. The intelligence implication is significant. To direct a drone toward a carrier strike group in the Arabian Sea requires persistent ISR coverage of the carrier's position, projected track, and approach geometry. That level of surveillance indicates a deliberate targeting chain, from observation through authorization through execution. The drone's approach, despite de-escalatory measures, is consistent with an authorized probe of U.S. response thresholds, not a navigation error. Second incident. On the same calendar day, IRGCN patrol boats and a Mohajer drone approached the U.S.-flagged, U.S.-crewed merchant tanker MT Stena Imperative in the Strait of Hormuz at high speed. CENTCOM confirmed that those forces threatened to board and seize the vessel. The tanker, advised by maritime risk management personnel, increased speed and continued its voyage rather than halting. The destroyer USS McFall, then operating in the Persian Gulf, responded and escorted Stena Imperative. U.S. Air Force assets provided defensive air support. CENTCOM confirmed the situation de-escalated. The tanker continued safely. 2 events. One day, an attempted drone engagement against a carrier 500 miles offshore. A boarding attempt against a commercial tanker in the strait. The DOT advisory followed 6 days later. The military and commercial risk tracks are not operating on parallel paths. They are components of the same Iranian operational posture, assessed as coordinated or at minimum concurrent in timing. At 13:30, the strategic calculus comes into focus. Alexander Pergesi, Vice President and Senior Credit Officer at Moody's Ratings, provided the financial sector's formal framing of the risk environment. His assessment is calibrated and measured, which makes its content more significant, not less. The risk has not changed. It's always been there. This is not reassurance. It is a statement about the baseline risk condition of the Strait of Hormuz, a condition that precedes the current advisory, precedes the February 3rd incidents, and precedes the current US-Iran tension cycle. The Strait has always been a transmission channel for geopolitical risk into credit fundamentals. What has changed is the activation level of that risk. Pergesi characterized the current disruption scenario as a low probability but high impact event. Low probability is not zero probability. High impact means the consequences, if realized, are not contained. They transmit through energy prices, freight rates, regional credit infrastructure, and global supply chains simultaneously. A critical analytical point from Moody's: the Strait represents one of the few strategic levers Iran could use in response to escalating pressure from the US and its allies, including over Tehran's nuclear program. As pressure on Iran increases, the Strait becomes a more attractive lever to activate, even partially, even temporarily. The military pressure is confirmed. In June 2025, per confirmed reporting, the United States conducted strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure on President Trump's order. The strikes occurred. Iran's nuclear timeline was assessed as setback. The precise scope of damage is not publicly quantified in open-source reporting, but the broad characterization from multiple sources is significant. Iran's nuclear infrastructure was degraded. Iran entered the current diplomatic cycle, carrying that reality. The United States entered it with the Abraham Lincoln operating 500 miles off Iran's coast. The nuclear talks are confirmed. The United States and Iran have held direct negotiations in Oman. President Trump described them as very good, and confirmed sessions would continue. Iran's foreign ministry confirmed talks were expected to proceed. Iran's President Pezeshkian confirmed his government is pursuing negotiations through the foreign ministry. Both Oman and Turkey offered to host follow-on sessions. The talks are real. The IRGCN operations are real. Both are occurring simultaneously. Whether the IRGCN operations are deliberate signals coordinated with Iran's diplomatic posture or autonomous tactical decisions by local commanders operating independently of the negotiating track is not publicly confirmed. Both interpretations are assessed as operationally plausible. Neither has been resolved in open-source reporting. That ambiguity is the operational variable every commercial operator, underwriter, and credit analyst is currently pricing its own read. Xeneta, the freight pricing analytics platform, provides the current benchmark for how the container shipping market is reading the risk environment as of mid-February 2026. Container shipping services and capacity into the Arabian Gulf and Upper Indian Ocean are, per Xeneta's confirmed data, unaffected. Capacity on the China to UAE corridor, a route that transits the Strait, has been rising since November 2025. Supply has outpaced demand. Short-term average freight rates have declined from approximately $2,700 per unit to approximately $1,540 per unit. A falling freight rate against an active government threat advisory appears counterintuitive. Peter Sand, Xeneta's chief analyst, explains the structural context. Maritime businesses operating in the Middle East are accustomed to elevated risk conditions. The current risk level has been integrated into commercial operations for years, through insurance premium structures, elevated freight rate assumptions built into contracts, real-time analytics investments, and operational flexibility reserves. The risk is real. It is also familiar. A risk like this should not be ignored, Sand confirmed. But all maritime businesses working in the Middle East region are used to operating under elevated levels of risk. That calibration does not make the risk acceptable. It makes it manageable within the current threat parameters. Sand also confirmed the tail risk. The current stability could change quickly if uncertainty escalates. The structural vulnerability in the container sector is the operator composition. The vast majority of container ship owners and operators transiting the Strait of Hormuz are not American entities. They are European, Asian. The DOT advisory, technically addressed to American-flagged vessels, a fraction of total Hormuz traffic, has not yet produced a capacity or pricing response from non-US operators. They are holding current courses and schedules. If those non-US operators reassess, driven by physical security deterioration, insurance premium increases, or sanctions exposure, flag subset alone. The majority of the commercial traffic moves under non-US flags. Their risk calculus is the market. At 20 o'clock, the operational adaptations confirmed that the risk is already being managed in real time. Junaid Ansari, Director of Investment Strategy and Research at BIMCO Invest, identified a critical distinction for non-US operators. The primary concern in the current environment may not be physical security in the Strait. It is sanctions exposure. Worry comes more from a sanctions perspective than from a security perspective, Ansari confirmed. Shipping firms are monitoring every commercial decision for exposure to US secondary sanctions. A designation, a blacklist entry, a sanctions application that removes access to the US financial system. That outcome is assessed as more operationally disruptive to a shipping company than a physical incident in the lane, because physical threats are intermittent and location-specific. Sanctions are systemic and persistent. That is the dual-track risk architecture. Physical threat in the Strait, sanctions exposure in the balance sheet. Both vectors are active. Both are being managed simultaneously by commercial operators right now. The observable adaptations are confirmed. Some supertanker operators are increasing transit speed through the Strait, reducing the time window during which an IRGCN intercept is geometrically viable. At 15+ knots versus a standard 14 knot laden transit speed, the time in lane exposure shrinks. It does not eliminate the risk window. It compresses it. Shipping companies are deploying AI-driven real-time analytics platforms for threat monitoring and proactive routing. The technology enables faster identification of threat vectors and faster routing decision execution, allowing masters and operators to identify emerging situations before they develop into intercept. For containerized cargo, some operators are incorporating hybrid routing, combinations of sea freight and air freight for time-sensitive cargo categories. Where transit urgency justifies the significant cost differential, air cargo provides a Hormuz-independent channel. For petroleum tankers and LNG carriers, no air freight equivalent exists. The cargo moves through the Strait, or it does not move. Stand by on routing advisory. All commercial units copy. At 23 o'clock, history provides the operating framework. BIMCO's Larsen invoked the most directly relevant historical precedent, the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. During that conflict, both Iran and Iraq conducted systematic attacks on commercial tankers in the Persian Gulf, what became known internationally as the Tanker War. Estimates vary, but several hundred commercial vessels were attacked over the course of that conflict. Despite those attacks, oil kept flowing out of the Arabian Gulf. The global market absorbed the losses, repriced the insurance, and continued commercial operations. The Gulf export market did not shut down. Larsen's current assessment draws explicitly on that record. The most probable scenario in the present environment is not a Hormuz closure event. It is attrition of commercial operator participation. Some shipowners will opt out of the trade, Larsen assessed. And when this happens, the usual supply and demand dynamics will kick in and drive up freight rates. The economic transmission chain is explicit. Fewer operators accepting the risk means reduced supply of shipping capacity available for Gulf routes. Reduced supply against sustained demand. Persian Gulf petroleum exports do not decrease because fewer ships are willing to carry them, means upward pressure on freight rates. Higher freight rates transmit to delivered energy costs. Higher energy costs transmit to every import-dependent economy globally. The Strait does not need to close to produce that effect. It only needs to become expensive enough that marginal operators exit the trade. The Houthi campaign in the Red Sea provides the most recent benchmark for that dynamic. Confirmed. Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea and approaches to the Bab al-Mandeb Strait produced approximately a 50% reduction in vessel transits through that waterway. That traffic rerouted to the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to transit times and significant cost to operations. The rerouting worked because it was physically possible. The Strait of Hormuz has no Cape equivalent. Bab al-Mandeb can be bypassed by rounding the southern tip of Africa, a slow, expensive but viable detour. The Strait of Hormuz cannot be bypassed. A tanker departing the Persian Gulf has one exit. A 50% reduction in Hormuz transits cannot be absorbed by alternative routing because alternative routing does not exist. The capacity either moves through 21 nautical miles of Iranian adjacent waterway or Persian Gulf export capacity goes offline. That is not a prediction. It is a description of the physical constraint, and it is the constraint that makes the Strait of Hormuz categorically different from every other shipping risk environment currently active in the global maritime system. At 2600, the full operational picture comes together. The DOT advisory is in effect. The USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group is confirmed operating approximately 500 miles from Iran's southern coast. The IRGCN is continuously on patrol in the strait and approaches. The Shahed-139 intercept and the Stena Imperative boarding attempt are confirmed and on the record as of February 3, 2026. Nuclear talks between the United States and Iran are confirmed as ongoing, with uncertain outcome. In the container sector, Xeneta data confirms capacity holding and short-term rates declining, a market that has not yet priced in escalation. In the tanker sector, some operators are accelerating transits and deploying real-time analytics. Insurance underwriting models are being updated. Freight rate contracts are incorporating elevated risk assumptions at the margin. The International Chamber of Shipping confirmed its awareness at the institutional level. John Starpett, ICS Principal Director of Marine, confirmed the organization is closely monitoring the situation, while prioritizing the safety of seafarers working in the region. The ICS advised vessels to conduct thorough risk assessments and maintain vigilance consistent with established maritime security guidelines. The shipping industry is not in operational disruption. It is in adaptation. The adaptation is calibrated to the current activated risk level, not the maximum risk level. The maximum risk level, a partial or full Hormuz closure event, is assessed as low probability by every confirmed expert source in this analysis. BIMCO, credible threat, but probable outcome is operator attrition rather than closure. Moody's, low probability, high impact. Xeneta, stable now, could change quickly there. CAMCO, sanctions exposure is the primary active variable. Every one of those assessments points at the same constraint. The gap between the current operational state and the maximum risk scenario is not a fixed structural gap. It is a gap determined by diplomatic outcomes and command decisions in negotiating rooms and on patrol routes not accessible to open-source analysis. If the US-Iran nuclear talks in Oman produce a framework, IRGCN operational tempo in the strait is assessed as likely to moderate. If the talks fail, the pressure on Iran's nuclear program continues. The IRGCN's operational calculus in the strait resets without constraint. The strait becomes the primary available lever. All stations. Advisory status remains active. Continue current posture. The tankers are transiting. The carrier is on station. The IRGCN is patrolling. The nuclear talks continue. Somewhere in the traffic separation scheme right now, a vessel master is tracking a contact on a heading that does not match standard commercial traffic patterns. The bearing is steady, the range is decreasing. The speed is inconsistent with a laden tanker at standard transit speed. The log entry is being written. The decision loop is open, and the margin, measured in nautical miles, in minutes, in diplomatic hours, is narrowing. Subscribe to Navy Operations.